Well, I've been walking here since I could walk. I grew up not too far away from here, and it's a place where my family would always come, and we'd actually enjoy nature here. And kind of the puzzling thing is, this is about as natural as things get around the Twin Cities now. Things around here are slowly becoming more pacified, and by that I mean they're becoming overglorified dog walking parks. You know, it might look like woods when you look around here. If you look around, you see ponds, you see swamps, you see cattails, you see oak trees, you see thick buckthorn. Uh, but really, what you do see that kind of underlines the theme of modernity is picnic tables, park benches, bike paths, people walking dogs, and I can tell you that is not what constitutes a great habitat. And I think what's really important is to distinguish a park from a preserve. You know, there's a big part of me that looks at the wildlife in Minnesota and thinks we have a great opportunity. Unlike so many other metropolitan areas, we have the opportunity to incorporate a densely populated urban environment and also a wooded place where there can be substantial habitat and it can be sustainable habitat. And unfortunately, that's not quite the path that we're walking. Well, if someone came here today, they still might see a deer. They might. They might see a turkey. I'm sure they'll see all kinds of birds, and maybe some people will be able to find morels. A rare coyote might pass through these woods, but I tell you what, things are changing, and part of why they're changing is they have special hunts here every year now. They pretty much have an extermination policy, and I know that people aren't saying that because they see deer. They see deer and they think, well, if I'm seeing them, they must be overpopulated. So hunting these parks is completely justified. We can justify it because we don't want these deer eating the flowers that are underneath my windowsill. We don't want these deer crossing our major highways. So we justify basically a senseless annual hunt in our city parks. And basically, what that causes is kind of a desensitization to the fact that the deer population has been descending. Now, what does that mean? People probably say, well, the deer population was heavily overpopulated back in the 1990s. So the fact that they depopulated is not a bad thing. But it's more than that because we are also losing habitat. And so if we're trying to dwindle the numbers of deer down to one per square mile, like the DNR says is a healthy limit for this type of habitat, then basically what we're saying is we don't want deer to be here because they're not going to have access to this park. There's going to be new developments all the time that are going to cut this park off from the next park. And what that amounts to is if there's only one deer living in this square mile, it's just going to be a lonely deer until it dies. It'll probably get hit by a car looking for other deer. You ask, what is this park going to be like in 40 years? Well, there'll still be trees, but you'll probably be able to see through them. It'll probably look very much like a pasture, as they will try and do away with all the thick foliage on the ground. They will try to make this a safe place for people to be. And you'll see pavilions built. You'll see people walking their dogs. Maybe you'll see a frisbee golf course. You'll see this turned into a recreational facility and not a habitat. It won't be a place that is preserved. You know, our grandchildren will not see the wildlife here like it used to be, as already today the things have dwindled. It has become more pacified. So, what are the species that are meant to be here? It's really a tough question because if you look back in history, back just a couple hundred years ago, elk lived here and buffalo used to roam in Minnesota. It was very common that bears could be here, and every once in a while a rogue bear will still come by here. Now, am I saying we need to resurrect these foregone populations of animals? No. But really we just need to make sure that we're preserving what we still have. If we do find a way to incorporate, projects in order to bring back some of the larger species like elk into this region, that is something that I think we could take a look at for pursuing. I just think that the way our city has developed, that is not going to be something that would be very easy to do. Elk need very large ranges, and we have limited our wooded areas to just small pockets of trees. Not every single park has to have every element of recreation that people want. You know, People live next to a park and they think to themselves, man, we could really use a basketball court here, or we could use a hockey rink, or, we could use, a place to play softball. And they really don't think to themselves, if they just go a mile down the road, they can find a park that already has all those features. They don't need to have a bike path that goes through every single woodlot, because yes, there's woods here. Theoretically, there could be a standing population that lives in these woods. But if you put, bike paths through here and cross-country skiing through here and just random dirt bike trails and, you know, have a dog walking park, a dog walking park, then where are the deer supposed to lay during the day and feel safe? Where are the turkeys supposed to roost at night? You know, I know they do some level of diligence in terms of making sure that people aren't in here at night, so theoretically the wildlife can relax at night. But how are they even going to know that they can do that when they're chased out of here every day on a daily basis? And if they go from the park, where do you expect them to be? They're going to be in little tiny woodlots behind people's houses, and those are the people who are complaining about, oh, my roses are being eaten. We need to have a special hunt. The deer are overpopulated. And it's gotten to the point where if you walk through these woods now, you won't even see a deer most of the time. It's become a rare thing. It's like the white buffalo. It's not that extreme, but it's just the idea of we are preserving this facade of natural, but it's really not natural. We kind of hold it up like a nature museum, you know, instead of wild animals in 40 years, maybe what we'll have is we'll just have mounts of animals along our paths. And so we can walk along with our Shih Tzus and we can see animals that we want to see, but sure, they won't be alive. Maybe we can have robotic tails and they'll wag, give us a semblance that we're in nature. But if you look around, we can see that nature is deteriorating. Nature is falling apart all around us. Even as I sit here on this rock, I hear cars driving by, I hear trains, I have planes flying over. It's falling apart all around us. And I don't think that's something that we should be comfortable with as a society. I know that we got to make room for modernity, but there has to be more that we can do to make sure that animals have ways to go in and out, of these woodlots. And they have to have places where they feel safe. It's not fair to them that every time they lay down, they're going to be chased out by your Labrador Retriever. And it's not fair to them that they can't access other populations of their same species, whether it's turkeys, whether it's deer, whether it's pheasants, whether it's grouse. They are social animals just as much as people are social animals. They need to be able to connect with each other. That is how their population sustains. And that's why we have to have reasonable considerations for how we can connect our habitats instead of divide them. We need to develop smarter. Instead of building these windy roads that isolate pockets of deer and just frustrate homeowners, we really need to figure out a way to leave byways. Leave byways so that deer can travel safely. And so motorists on highways can drive safely without having to worry about animals jumping out of the ditch. It's one of those things where when we concentrate on the human aspect of how we can develop this land, we forget that we are the newbies here. We are the newcomers. We are the ones who are entering this forest. This isn't ours. It wasn't. It's becoming ours just because we are pacifying it. We are getting rid of all the aggressive animals. And because of that, we're also going to get rid of all the prey animals. Some things will still exist in 40 years. You ask, what will be here in 40 years? squirrels will be here in 40 years, rabbits will be here in 40 years, robins will be here in 40 years. But other than that, it's really hard to project that any larger animals like coyotes or deer will still be in these woods. And I think if we have a future that looks like that, we're really letting down the next couple generations. You know, even in the woods around the cities, you find yourself standing next to artifacts of civilization. And one of the things that you can see right here is this pipeline, this gas pipeline that's just cutting through the woods. And, you know, that's something that people don't really look at too seriously. People are like, we need to make our infrastructure. We have to be able to cut through this woods. It's the easiest way, you know, and it's just one of those things where, for modern convenience, we are kind of discounting the fact that maybe something else belongs here. Maybe this has a negative impact on our habitats. You know, there's a strong contingency of people who will say, well, nature is more powerful than human civilization. Why do we have to worry about nature when we should really be worrying about human civilization? But I think there's so much evidence out there that's the exact opposite. You know, people are finding out more and more about the Pacific, you know, garbage patch, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is increasing in size and killing animals. And so I guess it all depends on what we count as nature. You know, is human actions nature? Well, kind of, sort of. You know, it's not something that's growing. You know, we develop stuff in laboratories that would not exist without our manipulations of natural materials. And so, yes, the world technically will live on long after human beings, and the world itself will be fine. There might be primitive life forms that still exist if there was a nuclear war. You know, they say cockroaches may be able to survive, and maybe from that, a whole plethora of different species can develop. But is that really what we want to protect? Is the idea that nature will be fine in an absolute sense? Or do we want to protect that sense of, this is our home, this is our habitat, and in order for it to be our habitat, it also has to be the habitat of other animals. And so when we remove ourselves from the wilderness and we put ourselves in houses, we build skyscrapers, we develop these concrete highways, and we have bridges and overpasses that go over these railroad tracks, and we got all these oil products on top of oil products on top of, you know, chemicals that are just killing off everything that was native to this world. What do you expect to happen? Basically what's happening is everything else that was natural to this part of the world is falling apart, and that's what I mean by deteriorating. What's deteriorating? The past is deteriorating. You know, the historical populations of birds, of mammals, of even indigenous people have deteriorated because of how we treated our priority. And in the end, that's going to bite us in the butt. That's going to come back to haunt us because we depend on these things. We need other stuff around us to live in order for us to thrive. And anyone who says anything else about that doesn't have a good grasp about what life really entails. You know, what are people dependent on? So, yes, technically speaking, the world will live on. There might be plants, there might be birds, there might be cockroaches, whatever else. But if we keep not having regard for our habitat, we're going to miss out on something that humans may never experience again. I know there's some people who look at a place like this and they're like, well, I want to be able to enjoy this place. And if I don't have my bike path, how am I going to enjoy it? I love bike riding, that's how I want to enjoy this place. Or I love skiing, put in some ski trails so I can enjoy this place. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair to people who just want to enjoy wildlife. What if I want to photograph rare birds? What if I want to look for morel mushrooms? I think those are things that can be done when we have more of a preserving mentality instead of a disruptive mentality. You know how many deer are going to lay along a bike path? None. None are going to sit there and watch dogs be walked and bikes go by. What I envision is that we have more places that, yes, you can walk into them, but they're preserved. We preserve the land as it is, and if it's in need of restoration, we restore it. We restore it with the intent of preserving it. We don't need to create a park for human beings. We don't need to have this be a place of entertainment. I could enjoy a game of tennis if there's tennis courts here, but let's think about our quality of life. What is really the determining factors of our quality of life? Is it my ability to go and play tennis? No. I do think that enjoying the other great species that are on this earth is part of it. If I don't have a place where I can go and recreationally watch nature be natural, then my quality of life is less. You know, you can talk about standards of living all you want, but if I don't have the ability to just enjoy something that's pure and simple as walking around in the woods and witnessing what nature is supposed to do, then I am missing out and my life is worse because of it. I think it's a very important distinction to realize that having things is not the same as having a great life. You know, our standard of living is not quality of life. Quality of life is something more internal and existential. How we relate to the world, how we relate to nature is something that's more personal than what things do we have at our disposal. And so if you look around the suburbs, if you look around at, Cottage Grove or any other suburb across America, I'm sure you'll see similar things. You'll see tons of parks that have all kinds of amenities, but a lot of them are not even being used. There's basketball courts sitting empty. There are, you know, there are hockey rinks that people don't even skate on. There are football fields and nobody's signing up to play football, and that's happening all over the place. Why is it that we must continually disrupt nature in order to placate our selfish desires when we don't even really realize what we are going to use and what we're not going to really use? It's one of those things that people don't have a great sense. It's always this utilitarian thought. The utilitarian thought, it's consequentialism, as in we believe that something is good on the basis of whether or not it worked. If something turned out to have good results, then it was a good idea. The problem is you could never know that it was a good idea until after the deed is done. And so you can't create an ethic there. There's no virtue there. Once you chop down the trees, it's gone. See, the problem is the infrastructure that we build in a park is meant to meet the needs of human beings. If we could, as a culture, find some way to enjoy a place that is meant to meet the needs of other animals, of other plants, then I think that we would have a better relationship with nature. It all goes back to understanding how we are connected to everything around us. You know, even other people are connected to other people that they don't even think about. It's like how a farmer is related to an urbanite. They make the food, the urbanite eats it, but the urbanite probably frowns upon the life of a farmer because they'd rather be living in the city. But you can only do that so long as you have farmers. And the quality of our world is dependent on the continuation of nature as we see it today, and if we can restore it to some level of what it was before. I think people like to look at human civilization in a vacuum. They like to think, well, human beings are the most important forms of life. But what kind of life would it be? if this was all gone, if all these trees were not here any longer, if instead we had swing sets, we had playgrounds, what if we had a pavilion? What if we had barbecues over there and there was people playing soccer? Yeah, some people would say that's not that bad at all. I enjoy playing soccer. I enjoy playing volleyball. Put up some volleyball nets and